Council. We're not going to do introductions individually because there's lots of us here and it'll take a long time, and we've got quite a tight hour and we want to make sure there's lots of time to have discussions. So if you could all please put your name and your role in the chat, that would be great so everyone knows who's here. So as I said, my name's Elise and this is the first of 5 culture conversations that the members of the Culture Board and the Culture Working Group are invited to. The Culture Board is a group of strategic leaders across the city that are supporting the wider city and the council to think about what the priorities are for culture. And the Culture Working Group is a cross-party group of brilliant councillors who are supporting cultural development and also thinking about how we're going to deliver the cultural strategy for the city. And the Culture Board are also advising on that too. So this conversation is about cultural investment, obviously an extremely important topic for everyone working in the cultural sector in a very difficult environment financially at the moment. We need to think differently about how we get investment for culture in our city to support the amazing things that we do and to support. Oh, we need to press record. Sarah,
I've done
pressed record? Oh, okay.
I've done it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, to support cultural development in the city and to think differently about how we invest in culture across our city. So as I mentioned, we are developing the council are developing a new cultural strategy for the city, which is we'll have some actions for the council, but also citywide. So it's a citywide delivery and action plan. As part of that, we are trying to think differently about how we bring in investment. And we have appointed the brilliant consultants, Mary Helen Young, who is supported by Ben Stevenson and Emma Cox. And Mary Helen and Ben are here today to run the session after I've done my spiely bit. So yeah, we wanted to make sure that we are talking to you about what we're doing and you're engaged in the conversation as much as possible. The investment work, although it is obviously a key part of what we need to think about for the cultural strategy, it's not. It's separate. We need to more urgently think about it, and the cultural development for the cultural strategy is going to take over the next sort of 12 months. So I'm going to let Mary Helen talk about the work that they're doing. But thank you very, very much for coming, and we're really excited to see you. It's a pleasure to host this conversation.
Thanks, Elise. Yes, great to see everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Just a really brief introduction for myself. I'm a consultant in cultural infrastructure and investment and also nighttime strategy. I've had the pleasure of working with Carly Heath on the Bristol Music Fund, which some of you might have been involved in previously, also with PRD Consultancy that does a lot of work in the city, and also the City Centre Cultural and Community Space Strategy, which I believe that report is coming out very soon, and some of you were involved in that engagement as well. Ben, do you want to say hello?
Absolutely, yes. My name's Ben Stevenson. I'm a placemaking consultant, been around Bristol for about 10 years now. I run something called the Bristol Urban Forum. I'm chief exec of the Angel Islington Business Improvement District, and I'm a new trustee of Artspace Lifespace as well. So great to see you all.
Just one other bit of housekeeping. When we're trying to keep a lot of time for discussion. So once we get there, if you can just raise your hand to make any questions or comments, just so we can kind of manage that a bit better. Sarah, would you like to share the slides, please? That's what we agreed. Yes, perfect. Yeah, you can go ahead forward. So yes, Elise, I think, has introduced this fairly well. Obviously, the study that we've been asked to do is about possible sort of looking at the breadth and suitability of investment models for Bristol and funding sources, and also how that might be governed. But some of this obviously precedes the outcome of the cultural strategy. So it is a bit chicken and egg. So we're looking at kind of the art of the possible today in this discussion. And we'll be, I'll just go through a little bit what we see as that breadth of different funding models, and then we'll get into discussion. So can you go to the next slide, please? Actually, can you skip this one just for a second? Can you go to the next one again? I realize I want to talk about how we're thinking about assessment of these different models. And we're thinking in the way we will make our recommendations back to the council is against these 5 criteria, which we think are important to capture within this process. So looking at different types of funds and different fund sources, what's the scale of funding that could come through these different sources? Is it enough to meet Bristol's needs or very small amounts? We're looking at the likelihood of a particular type of fund working within the Bristol context, so taking into account economic, social, local aspects, and the availability of those funds locally. The third one is impact. So how aligned would a particular funding source be to the impacts that Bristol wants to see, but also some of those impacts that would be coming out of the cultural strategy work. Sustainability, how renewable is the fund? Does it take a lot of effort to kind of keep certain sources of funding coming through? As there's a lot of resource required in making that sustainable. And then the last one is flexibility, and this is can be a bit about restricted or unrestricted funding, but just how much that funding source can be adapted to what we need it to do. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? So keeping that in mind, this is the very long list of funding, and we are currently kind of sorting through these, and we're hoping that this discussion today can help us continue to do that. So the first column is all coming from individual sources, and that can be in a charitable philanthropy giving kind of way, crowdfunding we know and love, major donors thinking about developing that for the Bristol area. But then there's also discussion of the visitor levy, which still needs a bit of legislative backing. I'm not sure if people are aware that this is kind of a topic nationally at the moment, and there's been some support through different channels, but not a clear path as yet. And then you may be aware with the Bristol Music Fund project, we were talking about possibility of collecting ticket fees for that specific, but it could be thought about in a different way. Earned income. So I will also talk about potential governance of funding in a couple of slides. Not all forms of earned income would be appropriate for the council to try to collect, but we can think about which bodies might be able to take that on. There's things about kind of a culture membership or pass for the city that could then go on to fund other things. And then thinking about earned income trading sources, how that might cross-subsidize other things. Corporate and business, thinking about corporate giving, CSR funds. And again, we think about these criteria about how adaptable some of these funds might be to what we need them to fund in Bristol and how flexible they could be. Sponsorship, there are some schemes, some examples of really targeting sponsorship with the right kinds of partnerships to make cultural activity happen. Corporate funds, which are a bit more formalized, such as Argent or Legal in General, and then also business improvements already doing things for culture, but we might think about how they might adapt that. Funding coming through development and property. So you might be familiar with community infrastructure levy. I'm sure some of you are very familiar with it. Or Section 106. We'd like to get a bit more under the skin of that and how that's working currently in Bristol. Property returns, there are some land trust models, I think, in the local area, but thinking about how property can become a long-term asset to kind of gather some of that investment for the cultural sector. And then, or how council assets might be used in that way as well. There are examples where sale of council assets, this might be controversial. I'm not saying that this is definitely the case for Bristol, but in some cases, sale of assets go on to form a funding pot that can then kind of be an endowment or be something a little bit shorter term. Funding bodies, we of course have many national sources, and we are engaging with these funders as well through the course of the study. There's the evolving role of the West of England Mayoral Combined Authority and how that might take a greater role in culture going forward, especially with discussions around devolution from UK government. There are many, many oversubscribed trusts and foundations, but that needs to be on the long list as well. And then community foundations, such as you have an example in Bristol of Quartet, but there are examples nationally how that can work as well for culture. And then finally, again, long listing, council tax increase. We are not suggesting this is the way, but it needs to be on the list. And then just making sure that we understand what the current council cultural funds do for the city. So that is our very long list. And if we can just go to the governance slides, that's 2 slides down. And Ben, if I've missed anything, you can also jump in, but hopefully that was a quick overview.
No, that's comprehensive.
Okay, great. So again, we are at the very beginning of our study. We're not making recommendations at this stage, but we do want to make sure that we cover off how funding is best managed. So is that funds staying with the council in the way they have been, or are there adjustments to that? How can that work better, staying within the council? Should West of England Mayoral Combined Authority have a greater role or more formal role in Bristol and other spaces on funding for culture? Should a cultural fund or a cultural trust or some kind of form be set up outside of the council, which has this dedicated task? Is there an existing organization that could be modified or expanded or take on funding capabilities and managing those funds, or a hybrid of any of those 4? So this affects, when we go into our discussion, this obviously does affect how we think about funds being collected and what's sustainable and what's feasible and viable. That is a quick introduction. Does anyone have any initial questions or clarifications on that? Okay, great. We should go on to the discussion then. Ben, do you want to introduce? And the next slide has, yes, great.
Sure. So we know that's a lot to lay on you. This is a lot of stuff. But that what Mary Helen has just just talked to is going to form the basis of our discussion today, if that's right. So this is entirely interactive as a session. As a sort of, I don't know if we really need an icebreaker, but actually I think this is really important for us to bottom out. So what's your biggest concern for culture funding in the next 5 years is what we're going to start with. And then we will talk through all of those different potential funding sources and your thoughts around how those work against those criteria. So thinking about the sustainability of them, the flexibility of them, etc. And then we'll talk about what was on the last slide. So the best management model for culture funding, particularly as far as Bristol is concerned. So I'm hoping that we can start off with this. If any of you want to kind of chime in with your thoughts and your concerns about how culture funding is going in Bristol, how it's changing over time, what your concerns are about it. Shall we go to, and maybe should we keep the slides up? I can't see how many. So Samir, I can see that your hand is up. Can we start with you?
Ben, sorry, quick, just come ahead, Samir. Oh, great. If we could just put, Sarah, if you could just put the questions in the chat so we can see them and we'll see each other. Yeah, thanks.
Samir, do go ahead.
Hi, yeah. I mean, some reflections really, and also I'm wearing multiple hats on this call, and not everyone will be aware what they are. So I've been a fundraiser most of my arts career, mainly for organisations in London and here at St George's. I'm chief exec, but I take an active role in fundraising and continue to be involved in. I sit on the national committee of the Cultural Sector Network, which is a chartered institute of fundraising special interest group for culture, a big mouthful, and I run a national mentoring programme for early career fundraisers. So I'm wearing my fundraising hat with this. Secondly, I sit on, Margaret Hodge is doing an independent review of the Arts Council, which is running currently, and she will write to Lisa Nandy, if Lisa's still in post, in kind of October time. and there's 7 advisory panel members across the country, and I'm one of them. And we hosted Margaret on a visit here to Bristol. Some people on this call were involved in that last month. So just to say, in terms of Arts Council, there's no more money, so we've got to try and be inventive about how to make the little money go even further. So that's something that the advisory panel are tackling with. I've got some individual points around, you know, the individual things, so I'll come in and comment at that point when we're going through the list.
Thanks so much, Mia. Appreciate it. Who else has their hand up? I can't see. Do we have any other comments on your concerns around funding, Tom? Tom, your hand went up and down again. I can't.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I just thought I'd raise a bit of a hot topic in our industry specifically at the moment is ethical and moral diligence on funding.
Yeah.
I don't know if people across, I mean, it's not just us, it obviously goes all the way up to the British Museum and so on and so forth, but and art galleries, but certainly a big news story in the last month or so has been KKR, which is a massive venture capitalist firm that owns a lot of shares in festivals, and has been a really big backlash from audience and artists as to, you know, deciding whether or not to even go and play at these festivals as a result. So I probably should have put my hand up the earlier bit, but on the funding criteria, obviously I didn't see anything there on kind of ethical diligence. So I guess that would be a hot topic for us anyway.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, we did actually discuss that as a sort of cross-cutting criterion, I suppose. So actually, when we come to looking at the governance models, I guess ethical funding has to kind of be absolutely front and centre in that. And do you think that there is a particular concern that is getting worse as time goes on? So as other potentially public sources of funding diminish over time, that actually the temptation is to take that sort of unethical route, or do you think it's sort of the same as it always has been?
It's good. That's a really good question. I think certainly for us, the demands are such on us in terms of our, you know, the necessity to create revenue, that we get offered a lot of, let's say in our world, a lot of partnerships and kind of on-site activations and so on at our events that we turn down because, you know, ethically we're able to, and we're in a position to turn them down, but other independents sometimes are staring in a really, you know, rock and a hard place and maybe take partnerships they just have to, but they don't want to. You know, we're quite stubborn about it, but again, we're privileged to be able to at the moment.
Appreciate it, thank you. And I think it's interesting that this is something that's affecting festivals, I think, for the not necessarily for the first time, but more so than maybe it used to. Anyone else have any comments about their concerns around funding over the next 5 years? Joe?
I suppose I'm really should be here for listening rather than commenting, but I just feel personally that my biggest concern is that this is a huge shift of change, and that there's a transitional time. So wherever we're trying to get to, it's going to take a few years, and so my biggest concern is that we have to make reactions about and actions about funding when we need to build foundations for a new approach. So thinking transitionally and together rather than making silo decisions that we all, and obviously I sit within a local authority with incredible pressures on it. But yeah, thinking of a transition, a bigger transition to a new way of funding culture, and not losing things that we're going to need to build that new model.
That's so interesting. So and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it feels like if you're saying that maybe if public sources of funding are less available, then rather than just kind of going for the only available sources of funding, sort of as Tom was saying, that actually it needs to be led by a strategy and a kind of long-term view about what culture needs to be and how it's funded in future.
Yeah.
Councillor Russell, you had some comments.
Yeah, hi. I was going to say ensuring that the funding is reaching the right people. I think within arts, it can be quite an echo chamber of people who are privileged enough to access arts and festivals and music. So yeah, I guess ensuring that it reaches people who really need it. I know that like Big Team do some good kind of like sessions to uplift people of disadvantaged backgrounds, and yeah, that's a great example.
Great, yeah, good, great point. Thanks for making it. Jess.
Hey, yeah, just off the back of Izzy's point, I think there's kind of two things in my head around. One is sort of risk taking, that I guess one of my fears is that if funding becomes more scarce or harder to access, that the types of things that are funded are much less radical, less
Yeah.
boundary pushing, less change making, and that the entire cultural output suffers because of that. And I guess sort of related to that is not just it getting to the right people, but also directly funding freelancers who kind of keep the cultural sector going. And obviously WECA recently done some really great grants in that area. I don't know, I haven't seen any reporting on the kind of impact of that, but yeah, that kind of thing. You know, I think there's levels, aren't there? A lot of the funding goes directly to institutions, but how it actually impacts artists and that pipeline that Izzy mentioned around like young people getting into the industry, etc.
Jess, I'm so sorry if you're unable to do this, but can you say anything more about what WECA are doing around freelancers?
They gave out some grants. I was on mat leave, but maybe Elise or Joe probably know a bit more about it.
Well, we are talking to them too.
Yeah,
And we can get into that in that section of the
Right.
discussion as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the important thing about them, and we've also done grants. So I'm from Rosen Arts Agency. We support underrepresented young people. We also gave out some grants of a similar, like, it doesn't have to have an outcome. And obviously the Arts Council's DYCP has been great in terms of like supporting artists to develop their practice without a sort of like project output, which is a bit more experimental kind of funding. And I guess related to my fear of that kind of risk aversion, or what's seen as risky, is like that development not being invested in.
Developing your creative practice. Thank you. We actually only have 10 minutes for this, but Zoe, perhaps we can make yours the last comment, and then we'll go into the kind of broader discussion.
Okay. I mean, one thing that I think, kind of like going off from Izzy's point, is that one thing is to actually get people to learn these skills. There is, for many of the arts, a cost involved, especially if what you want to pursue is, for example, music. Instruments are really expensive, and that's one half of the problem. The other half is space. If you live in a, you know, a 2-bedroom flat with several siblings, you know, parents, and as well, you might not have the space to be able to be creative, whether that's to practice your music or to practice painting or whatever have you. And I think actually tackling the barriers for even entering or learning these skills is something that really needs to be tackled.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me just read out this final comment from Clara Collette. I'm sorry I'm in a library, so you can't come in on the mic, but I think it's something that I'm concerned about, is that many vital projects supporting communities, young people, isolated, older people, wellbeing programs, emerging creators, marginalised communities that are funded currently with cuts and difficult landscape and funding. What is going to happen with all those groups? The pressures on different services, etc., and just in general, arts organisations will lose that trust and relationships they've built with their communities and group that they work with. Basically, what's going to be the ripple effect? Very well said. Thanks so much, Clara. Mary Helen, could we go over to you?
Yes, please. Thank you. So I think we have about 5 minutes for each kind of major funding area for people to comment. Some might take less, hopefully, so we can spend a bit more time. But do we need the slide up again, or are you happy for me to just describe the areas?
We could put the areas in the chat. Maybe.
Oh, yes. Yes, I think if Sarah, if you don't mind doing that. I think they're bulleted out. So the first one is on individual sources, and this is both about sort of philanthropic giving from either crowdfunding or major donors. Maybe let's just do 2 minutes on that. Do we have, I think the opportunity around crowdfunding is probably well understood. And I want to maybe hear a bit more about major donors if anyone has any experience with that. Samir?
Yeah, so this is my whole background prior to arriving in Bristol, and you know, everyone just thinks that major donors are kind of the manna, you know, but you have to work so hard and it takes so long. So I just, you know, there's so much naivety around major donors, and when you see, like we have at St George's, when you see lists of donors, people, especially trustees, kind of think, well, it's easy, isn't it? And you know, this is the biggest problem I've had in my professional career as a fundraiser, battling with trustees who have very naive and ill thought out opinions about fundraising. And very often I'm the only person in the room that's actually professionally fundraised, you know, being paid to do something and actually got results. I have a positive suggestion though. I've been talking to Figurative, who are the agency that's evolved on from Nesta. And they've been working on this concept of place-based philanthropy, which is when an individual might create their wealth in one geographical area, normally the southeast, if they're, you know, in banking or in tech or something like that. But they're encouraged to invest back in communities which they have an affinity to, perhaps where they grew up as a child. I know that Figurative have done one of these sessions in Gloucester, and I'm really trying to persuade them to come to Bristol. And what they typically do is bring known philanthropists in a geographical area together with cultural organisations and just have a kind of dialogue, really. So that's something to lay out there. I do believe there is a lot of wealth in Bristol. And I do believe a lot of it, there are some very generous, typically families set up their own foundations. So you have like the Nisbets or John James. And if you look, they're funding a lot of cultural organisations. But I don't think they're only really funding the better known cultural organisations. They're not getting out to grassroots communities and individual artists. So how could they be encouraged to kind of spread the net wider in this time when we're facing austerity and we're facing cuts? And you know, there's no trust and foundation giving going on. Many trust and Foyle Foundation has just spent out. So you know, there's going to be a greater emphasis on individuals.
That's really useful. It brings to mind, actually, Samir, and maybe we talk about this in governance, about whether the role is brokerage of getting some of that funding to organizations, or whether it's about creating a fund for Bristol that then is distributed. So that kind of that might change how that could work.
Yeah, and sorry, just one more point and then I'll shut up. So on that theme of brokerage and taking the Bristol, everyone is at two persons. You know, I found moving to Bristol, everyone knows everyone and everyone wears multiple hats, and you're only at two people away from someone you need to connect to. And I feel that there's a massive private wealth management business in Bristol. You only have to walk around kind of Clifton and Redland, and every third shop front is private wealth management. And all of those people are advising wealthy individuals about how to manage their wealth. None of them are talking about philanthropy and support for charities in general, but a lot of these wealthy people love the arts, they come to the arts, but there's not, I mean, we work hard as fundraisers in individual cultural organisations to spot the audience members coming in that we feel might give more or might get engaged more, but we need help from professionals like wealth managers.
That's a great idea. Thank you. Any others on that quickly?
I just had a quick question. Sorry, Samir, to bring you in again, but obviously with your fundraising hat on, do you have any comments to make around the sort of sustainability of the different forms of giving, so around philanthropy or corporate giving, or what kind of works best and particularly would work best in Bristol?
Yeah, so the worst are corporates and trusts, because trusts will say, we're giving you this money, but don't come back to us for another 5 years. Right. And corporates, you know, you just need a change at the top, or, you know, a change, you know, the marketing director or whichever person is leading on that relationship and is your fan then moves. and you get a new marketing director who's all about change and like making their mark, and then suddenly that partnership that you worked so hard at is ditched. I mean, individuals is where it's at again, and given that the traditional major donor, it's a relationship that builds over time and takes a lot of hard work, but those people stick with you. So our highest level donors at St George's have been supporting St George. I've been at St George's 3.5 years, and they've been supporting for many years, if not decades, and there are potential legacy prospects as well.
That's really useful. Thank you so much.
Great. Let's go on to visitor levy. This might be more of a political conversation, but I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about how appropriate this might be for Bristol. Does everyone understand what it is?
Probably worth describing, or
Sorry?
I think worth describing.
So, well, it doesn't quite exist yet in the UK. There are models in France and other places where it's basically overnight visitors pay a fee to the hotel, which is then collected into a visitor levy. Ben, I hope this is all accurate.
It does exist in the UK in the sense that not through kind of legislation. So the Business Improvement District legislation has been used to create things called accommodation bids, which effectively have the same impact. So hotels essentially vote on whether or not they want to bring an accommodation bid into force, and then it's a £1 or some sort of levy on every hotel night, and that funding is then used to essentially boost tourism or boost the hotel sector. So for a lot of places, and many of you will have seen on the news that the Brit Awards is going from London to Manchester over the next couple of years. That is paid for out of bid levy. So quite a lot of it is around bolstering the kind of bits of the hotel sector that need bolstering around conferences and events and that sort of thing. But there is a suggestion that the accommodation bid model could also be used to fund culture if that then encourages the visitor economy.
Councillor Stafford Townsend.
Yeah, just to add as well that, which you were kind of alluding to a second ago, that legislation means that we can't do it in England, but under devolved powers, Scotland and Wales have different capabilities to do it. So there's something like a tourism tax in Edinburgh, I think it is, or that is coming in there, but that's because they've got that devolved power to do so, which we don't in England.
Yes, but various factors are pushing on possibly changing that, but we don't know if and when that would happen. Carly?
Yeah, I suppose I've seen how the visitor levies worked quite well in Berlin, and what they've managed to, I will obviously always think with the nighttime economy and music culture hat. What the nighttime economy advocates there were finding is that they weren't actually being able to benefit from it, and the music sector wasn't able to benefit from the visitor levy. They were only able to advocate for some of this money by doing their own data research on how many people are coming to Berlin for the club culture and for the music culture, and not for that kind of like broader remit of culture that's understood, what I call big C culture, is understood to be the arts, museums, theatres, orchestras, those kinds of things. But so it's really around making sure that the definition of culture really actually represents what people are coming into the city to come and experience, and making sure that festivals, gigs, music events, those kinds of things are actually really represented when we're making that definition of what culture is, and making sure that the people who are putting that on, 78% of Bristol's events happen in venues that are under 1,000 capacity, making sure that that money does actually get to the people who are doing the kind of hard labour of bringing people into the city for our fantastic music events. So I agree with like a visitor levy. Obviously, with the Bristol Music Fund, we're trying to create our own version of a levy that's community governed, but under the current model, because we already have business improvement districts in the city, most of the hotels are in business improvement districts already, and they're unlikely to vote themselves out of a very well functioning bid to be able to vote themselves into a different thing, where effectively they're asking their customers to give money to fund a different sector. So there is a lot of complex stakeholder management that would need to happen underneath that environment.
And governance to make sure it goes where it needs to go. Yeah. Councillor Stafford Townsend.
Yeah, just wanted to back Carly up on what she's just said, and to say as well, for the 3 bids that we have, which we're currently balancing on making into one big bid, quite a lot of the big hotels vote against bids generally, the ones that we've got in the city. So whilst they might vote to take themselves out of a bid, potentially it's very unlikely that they'll vote to make a new bid, because at the moment the other businesses within the bid areas outvote the hotels that aren't keen on bids in the first place. So therefore, if we had an accommodation bid ballot, knowing how some of the hotels that we've got the most numbers of in Bristol would vote,
yes,
normally with a bid would mean that they wouldn't vote for it either. So there's the risk of weakening the bids that we've already got and not getting something else at the end of it.
That's great. We might need to move on to the next topic. I think Ben and I sort of understand the workings here. Go ahead, Carly.
I just wanted to add as well that the accommodation bid actually just deals with hotels and doesn't deal with things like Airbnb and those kind of more informal spaces. And, you know, that is something that would definitely need to be considered when it comes to this kind of model.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, that's been really useful. Moving on to earned income, and again, this is one where the form of governance for funding really matters, because it affects how much council could do trading or other organizations could do trading. Does anyone know of any examples actually of this working well, of kind of trading, creating enough surplus to subsidize the sector, or any thoughts on that? And this also includes, I should have said, any kind of membership or culture pass kind of structure. Amir.
Hi there. So at St George's, 1/3 of our overall operating income comes from trading. So our cafe bar, which we own ourselves. I'm very happy to talk to anyone thinking of setting this kind of thing up. More and more cultural organisations are relying on, if they're venue based, to have this. And I know certainly kind of festivals as well rely hugely on the kind of the wet sales. On the kind of cultural pass side of things, a discussion that's already started is around a kind of a culture pass for young people, and if we could get kind of a sponsor or a funder for that, which because many of us are part of the BAM, Bristol Arts Marketing, and so there is a vehicle who would be sympathetic to cultural organisations working together to give free or discounted tickets to young people. But there needs to be, it's less about I think most organisations would take the risk on saying, right, we're going to give discounted tickets and we'll take the hit on our ticket income, but it needs kind of central coordination and marketing, and that's where the cost would be.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Yeah, I understand trading is probably becoming more important for a lot of organizations, but it becomes a bit more complicated when you think about trading from a central sort of fund. The opportunities might be a little bit more limited. Okay, we'll move on to corporate and business. I think Samir gave a good introduction to that already, but does anyone have any other positive or otherwise stories on CSR, sponsorship, engaging with corporate funds, any of that they'd like to contribute? Has anyone, maybe hands up? So Carly, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know whether you saw me put that in the chat. Bristol City Funds is something that the city has actually set up to try and support CSR contributions to be able to redistribute to things that have got some sort of social value. So there is already an existing model that was set up underneath Marvin's administration that does already exist. So there's things that could be tapped into quite quickly. And of course, when the Bristol Music Fund exists, that could as well.
Of course. But in the chat you put, is this the UK grant making link, Carly? Is that the one you're talking about?
No, I think the chat's moved on a little bit from there, Mary Helen. I was just saying before about like when you're talking about wet sales, you know, like the business model of nightlife is contingent on bar sales. The promoter or the performer is often an external hire, and they take the door and the bar takes the bar. And, you know, like any kind of balance where we're trying to offer free tickets and stuff will actually generally come out of the pockets of independent promoters and performers, which is obviously the people that we're trying to help.
Yeah. Elise?
Yeah, thanks. So the other thing I just wanted to say, sorry, it's going back a step, is around opportunities when tourists come to the city, for them to buy a pass so that they can find out what's going on and get a discount on, you know, different places. But also something that's come up through some of the consultations with the cultural development so far, particularly with the citizens, is we don't know, there's no obvious place to know what's going on in the city, and so there's a potential opportunity for, you know, members in the city to pay for membership into something at a scaled model that then helps support the infrastructure of making that happen, but also, you know, gets people finding out about what's happening in the city. But if tourists pay, Visit West need to look at that as part of cultural tourism. But it's interesting to think about these different models where you know, individual giving can be as small as £15 a year for the local community, but it could be much higher for tourists visiting that then would support the local access to culture, and then may be able to then enable young people, that being free for young people. You know, there's different ways we could think about what individual giving is. It could be really small amount locally, but then higher for tourists. The other thing that I just wanted to mention was that there's a model that the council have set up recently, which is where people can invest a kind of savings pot into a scheme that's kind of being run by the council and a partner. I can't remember who the financial partner is, and they're using the profits of that to then support climate action and sustainability schemes within the city. So the idea is that you use it as a kind of savings, like an ISA account, and then you get a good profit from that, but know that your money is helping to support and fund sustainable projects for the city. So there's various different models that are happening, and as Carly mentioned, the Bristol City Funds has some initial investment and is kind of not happening at the moment, but I just wanted to give those examples.
Yeah, brilliant. Councillor Shabalala.
Hi, I really like the element of trade, and I think for freelancers and small retailers, one of the kind of main costs is obviously the rental costs and marketing costs. So if you have an overarching kind of organization that deals with the retail, then it's actually driving footfall into that space to be able to sell whatever the goods and products of the industry is. And I think we have to think of trade as the most self-sufficient process that's probably got more guarantee that it can happen than other options. So maybe if we, you know, from the options that you put out, if we can think of it as high risk, low risk, you know, approach, that would actually then help where we prioritize our thinking, so that we're thinking about the 5-year, but which are the short-term things, long-term things, which of those have got more risk than others. But I do think trade is something that is sustainable over a long period of time, because trade is both an internal thing, it's a regional thing, and it's also an international thing. You know, what are the goods and products that we are kind of bringing together as Bristol and promoting those out to the wider city internationally and so forth. So, you know, I'd like to see how we can explore trading opportunities within Bristol, along with the IP that's linked with products and services. But how do we make destination of, you know, say Nicholas Market, for example, of Bristol Trade, Arts and Cultural Fair, one location, one footfall, you know, and
Yeah.
then the profits then go to the different things. So it's quite a subsidized model that is not there to take a lot of income from staffing. It's there to subsidize the sector, not,
Mhm.
you know, big jobs, big incomes. That's not what the model is. The model is it has a surplus and the surplus is then distributed.
Yeah. Good points. I mean, I suppose quite a few of these models are trying to extract wealth out of trade, whether that's things like visitor levy, or also this probably leads very well on to the property discussion, things like creative land trust models. How do we get the wealth that's created by increase in property values, for instance? So it's, yeah, how do you ring fence and capture through trade funds for culture, I think is the £1,000,000 question. Shall we move on to property? We might not get to national funds because I feel like a lot is known. Maybe we could have a quick chat about WIMCA at the end. But in terms of property, does anyone have any feelings about the use of community infrastructure levy or Section 106 locally? Are there positive or negative experiences with that? Samir.
Hi, I think it's just all a bit opaque because, you know, I talk to community-based organisations who don't really know about it. Then I talk to kind of Jones Lang LaSalle and people like that. And it's like, well, we'd love to work with community organisations. So there's a bit of naivety on both sides. But if there was more of a brokering role or even just bringing together people in the same room, you know, and an understanding of all of this. I mean, we're right in the thick of all the Park Street transport proposed transport changes, and we've been really proactive. We've started our own cultural quarter on the back of this, and in fact BID are putting in money to help us commission some banners that kind of act as signifiers of all the culture that happens in our particular neighborhood. But you know that there will be WECA funds eventually because they're the overall sponsor for this. But I do feel there's just a lack of transparency around it. And the second point is there are just so many empty buildings, and I've just seen some amazing stuff. I went to see one of Verity Sandon's pieces, Polyphony, which was in the Gallery Shopping Centre, which is about to be knocked down. But my understanding is these kinds of things could happen in Cabot or even at Cribs, but the actual individual land, I think Cabot is Hammerson's, and you hit a brick wall eventually. So the more pressure that can be, because back to I think Zoe Pete's comment about people in spaces. I mean, many arts organizations that are based in venues, we don't have any money, but what we do have is space. And I've said this before at One City Culture Board meetings, to move away from a deficit model of we can't do it, oh woe is us, to like, well, what do we have? We've got expertise and space, even if we've not got the money. So a little bit more joined up thinking around that as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Sims?
Yeah, that's good to hear of that aspiration, and a lot of work has gone into that. As Mary said in the beginning, is the report around the use of space, mainly around the centre, was just finished in March, I'm sure, Joe, and that report will now kind of get out in terms of the use of ground floor unit spaces, because the same conversation that we're having here, that conversation is about one organization that could look after the ground floor unit space to make them activated, to make sure that it's sustainable, to make sure that it can support smaller retailers to be in those spaces, whilst there's an element of give and take, risk and non-risk, to kind of manage the the portfolio. And then it's also arts and culture activation through that organization. So all of this is all kind of seeing if the culture one would need to have a different organization versus the one about the ground floor units, because all developments that are taking place now as part of their planning permission, they need to have ground floor community space. And some of those community spaces are unused at the moment, and thus we've been going through this discussion, and Mary has submitted that project with Joanne and the team. So that report is there, and it will be coming out soon, so we can join these conversations up. So we are working on that. I think that's really good to hear that it's still quite a strong need. My point was more around SIL and Section 106. I think, you know, for Central, it's a kind of blurry situation, but that shouldn't be blurry. All the development that's happened around here, Central has only been awarded 30,000 worth of SIL, as in communities have actually applied for 30,000 worth of SIL over a 5-year period. However, when you look at other wards like Lawrence Hill, Eastern, and so forth, they've actually delivered 1.2 million and above by now of SIL over the last 5-year period. So what that means is that the Central, all these projects are happening, but the Central community is not necessarily benefiting from the infrastructure, because it's perceived as, well, the work is happening, so therefore they will benefit. However, many buildings are deteriorating. The communities, you know, Redcliffe, Kingsdown, are feeling more left behind and seeing the developments happen, but nothing is actually happening for them. So what we're working on is the exploration of neighborhood plans for Redcliffe and Broadmead, on the basis that we want to kind of secure the SIL and influence where that Section 106 money goes. And some of those conversations Joe would kind of allude to more, even when you look at Castle Park, is like, well, what is the Section 106 of the galleries of nearby developments, and how does that Section 106 influence what's needed in the parks versus still being the money that goes into that? It should be the city's money, or Section 106 still should do other things like investing into St. George's. But, you know, again, maybe if you didn't know, and I could see that, because for the last 5 years, there's never been an application from St. George. You know, Central has had fewer applications than most wards put together in terms of that. So there's been a disparity, a huge disparity in terms of Central. So these are quite interesting conversations to think about Central. However, when we're talking about culture and this kind of discussion, we're also thinking quite a citywide approach too.
Thank you. That's really useful kind of briefing there. Thank you. Councillor Durston.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So kind of a similar point to Sibs, actually, in terms of SIL. I think how Section 106 is applied is a different conversation, but in terms of SIL, because of how it's split across the different areas of Bristol, and there's always a lot of applications for lots of different kinds of SIL projects, and it's very much kind of just, you know, it's prioritised by the people that sit within the councils that sit within area committees as to where the funding goes. It could be quite sort of inequitable in terms of some areas choose to fund culture or cultural projects and others don't. So it could be a bit of a sort of lottery. It wouldn't be sort of split fairly or evenly across the city.
Okay.
Potentially.
Yeah, that's really important to know. We are sort of running out of time. I did want to keep a few minutes back for Wimka. Joe, do you want to say something?
Only really quick. That's a really good points from everyone there, and we are doing sometimes in the culture team we're working with work that's driven by regeneration. So that's the reason why sometimes there's work that's happening over in a regeneration driven area. So the pieces of work that Sibs is referring to, and there's another cultural activation public art piece of work that relates to developers and Section 106. I think in the autumn, in the next month or two, we'll be able to publicise this work, and I think we should be late summer, autumn, maybe having some gatherings about to attack this issue of transparency and blurriness. So I just wanted to say it's really interesting to listen into that, and alongside this work, maybe there's some gathering and sharing, so we're all a bit clearer about what's going on in this area would be good. So I'll take that away.
Just before I come on to Carly, I would like to table any thoughts about the West of England Combined Authority as a funder, and I think we'll have to finish on that last question instead of going on to governance, because I think there's some thoughts that have come out about that that's been helpful. Carly? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having some connectivity troubles here. Just to kind of think about that when we were talking about the kind of broker.
We've lost Carly.
We have lost Carly. If anyone wants to put their hand up about West of England?
Am I still here?
Hello, you're back. Yes.
Am I back? It looks you were all moving, so it looked like you were there. Yeah, that conversation around the brokering of relationships. There's, I wonder whether there's something that we could do to like a pitch to investor, kind of like in like people that have got money and people that have got ideas, sort of like actually brokering those conversations and having actual sessions that bring people together, because doing the sort of long-term relationship building and doing the kind of like grant application process just doesn't work for some creative communities, but they can communicate their projects very, very well, and much more sort of like a Dragon's Den style thing where they can actually pitch ideas and pitch and ask to people that are ready to be able to contribute to something. Could be something that I think Bristol would be able to convene very well. And secondly, there was the conversations around money going into parks and all of that kind of stuff. Festivals and outdoor events pay an inordinate amount of money in terms of site hire. You might have lost me. Site fee hire, but lots of that money actually goes into the parks department and doesn't necessarily come back into cultural events. That's probably a question for the members on this call to be able to take back, but actually thinking about how much of that money that culture is generating itself could be reinvested in the cultural organisations across the city.
Great, thank you, Carly. I think we're about out of time, and I haven't had any hands to talk about WECA, poor WECA. But we will be speaking to them as well, so we can continue to investigate that. I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, unless anyone has a burning 5-second comment. Great. Yeah, thank you so much. Elise, did you have anything you want to say at the end here?
No, just thank you. Well, yes, I said no, and then I'm going to speak. Yes, please. I'd like to say thank you very much for everyone attending this group. As we said, this is the first of conversations. We'll keep you updated on as this work develops. The work that Mary Helen, Ben and Emma are doing is working at pace. So we hope that we can update you soon on what the next steps. Watch out for the further culture conversations that are in your diary. And thank you for coming to this session and bringing your thoughts. If you have any thoughts that have come to you through this session, but you didn't have a chance to say, that quite often happens to me. If you email me and Sarah or Mary Helen, please let us know. Or if you want to have a separate conversation about this, please do let us know. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks. Hope you all have great days.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.